Du Fu, a song of painting, to General Cao Ba. You, General, descended from Emperor Wu of Wei, now live as a peasant, a cold-door commoner. Although that heroic age of conquest is long over, its cultural brilliance still survives in your work. To learn calligraphy, you first studied with Lady Wei. Your only regret was not surpassing great Wang Shiji. You say, caught up in my painting, I give no thought to old age. Riches and rank to me are no more than clouds floating by. Often summoned to court during the Kaijuan period, you frequently ascended the dais to receive the emperor's praise. In the gallery of famous men, the noble faces were fading. Going to work with your brush, you made them bright again. On the ministers' heads you repainted their hats of office. At the waists of fierce generals, their great feathered arrows. The Duke of Bao and Duke of E, so lifelike their hair bristles, stand grim, bold and heroic, as if still drunk with battle. The late emperor's dappled horse, Jade Flower, was painted by artist after artist. None captured his likeness. One day he was led into the courtyard below the red steps. Just standing, he brought with him the wind of the plains. At the emperor's command, you stretched white silk. Calling up all of your skill, you formed the image in your mind. In a flash from the ninefold heavens, the true dragon appeared. At one stroke, the horse paintings of ages were obliterated. When the painting was taken up and hung behind the throne, the horse on the wall and that in the court stood facing each other. Smiling, the emperor urged his aide to bring a reward. Stable boys and grooms stood about, long-faced with envy. Your pupil, Han Gan, was shown all of your techniques. He too can paint horses in every stance imaginable. But Gan paints only the outer flesh, not the strong frame beneath. His brush would sap the spirit of legendary Hua Liu. The general is a superb painter because he captures the essence. In the past, you also made portraits, but only of exceptional men. In the present troubled times, uprooted and homeless, you are reduced to painting portraits of humble passers-by. So desperate are your straits, you suffer dirty looks from vulgar eyes. Perhaps never in the world has a gentleman been poor as you. But look at the lives of those in history rich in fame. Many among them also dealt with endless frustrations. So here we have another poem of Du Fu that tells us about that master painter, General Cao Ba, who was introduced in the previous poem through the glimpsing and the description of one of his paintings. Now this poem centers squarely on General Cao Ba. It gives some of his background, it describes some of his greatest achievements, and it tries to give some consolation to General Cao Ba in these present times of turmoil in which, in spite of his merit and his past glory and wealth, he has been reduced to a destitute condition. So the main topic of the poem is evidently appraisal, recognition, praise of a great artist, of a great painter, Cao Ba. Apart from praising and describing this man's ability, we get some references to the painting art itself. So, in a very small part, but in a significant part, this poem could be described as a mini treatise on the wonderful, the best way of painting, which would be Cao Ba's. There's a little bit of flattery here, I imagine, but I think most of the tone and the message of the poem can be accepted at face value, as a realistic and honest recognition by a master poet, Du Fu, of a master painter, Cao Ba. In fact, there might be a bit of an identification in the way in which Du Fu praises Cao Ba. Perhaps consciously or unconsciously, he is painting a fresco of a fellow artist like himself, of equal size and equal genius. Du Fu, a master of the brush for painting with words, and Cao Ba, a master of the brush for painting with images. There's also, especially in the last part of the poem, a consolation, an attempt at consoling the artist, and perhaps at self-consoling himself, Du Fu, with the message that, great artists have suffered in the past and worthy people have not been recognized. Okay, so let's begin analyzing the poem bit by bit, following the divisions that are created by the stanzas that the translator, David Lunde, of this poem has elaborated. We could say that the first part of the poem, composed of the first 4 couplets, you could say, is an introduction where we get a vision of General Cao Ba's background, his youth, and his coming of age and starting to become an artist. You, General, descended from Emperor Wu of Wei, now live as a peasant, a cold door commoner. So the couplet begins with a presentation, and with this big contrast that we already saw in the previous poem of riches to rags. General Cao Ba was a descendant of an emperor, in fact of a royal dynasty in China, the Cao Wei, who had ruled China in the period of the 3 kingdoms, roughly 400, about 400 or 500 years, half a millennium before the Tang dynasty. And this scion of a great general, who was also a great artist, is now forced to live like a poor person, like a beggar. How things change, not only in time, from his royal ancestors to today, but in his own lifetime, from the time of splendor when he was a courtly painter a few years ago, to his current destitution. We continue. Although that heroic age of conquest is long over, its cultural brilliance still survives in your work. Now, this is ambiguous. Although that heroic age of conquest is long over, its cultural brilliance still survives in your work. I'm not sure if this is meant to have a double meaning, but it does seem to be so. So what period, what age of heroic conquest has been finished? Because of the reference in the previous couplet to Cao Ba's ancestor, Emperor Wu, one could think that the heroic age that is finished and whose cultural brilliance lives in the work of Cao Ba is the age of his ancestor, Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu was a martial hero. He had many wars that were later chronicled in history books and novels. And he was a patron of artists, of poets especially. And the literary production of that time was justly valued. The writers of the Jianan era were considered among the best writers in the old style pentasyllabic or heptasyllabic, mainly pentasyllabic poetry. But again, as we will see from the next couplet, perhaps the age that is being reminisced is the age in common in which Du Fu and Cao Ba were serving at court under Emperor Xuanzong, which was an age of unparalleled riches and splendor. So I suppose here both are referenced. The heroic age of conquest is over. Its cultural brilliance survives in your work. So this could be either the 10, 15 years back of Emperor Xuanzong's reign, when the empire was expanding and rich, and Cao Ba was a courtly artist who still continues living and producing art today. Or it could be a reference to the age of his ancestor, the remote ancestor of Cao Ba, the Jianan era, when great battles were fought and wondrous poetry was being forged in the court of Cao Cao. Anyway, in the next couplets, we clearly shift again to the present, at least to Cao Ba's present, his youth, To learn calligraphy, you first studied with Lady Wei. Your only regret was not surpassing Great One Shiji. So before becoming a painter, Cao Ba, it seems, studied calligraphy. He was pretty proficient. He studied under probably a great teacher, that Lady Wei. And his only frustration was not surpassing Wan Shiji. Now that's a very ambitious desire. Wang Shiqi is probably, without a doubt, the greatest Chinese calligrapher of all time. At least he is the greatest Chinese calligrapher before the Tang Dynasty. He was a writer in the period of disunion, characterized by his creativity, genius, innovation, spontaneity, and some copies of his work are still around today. Basically, his preface to the Orchard Tower Pavilion gathering. So here in this couplet, we get a sight at the incredible ambition of General Cao Ba, trying to surpass the greatest calligrapher of all time. Surely shows your ambition. You say, caught up in my painting, I give no thought to old age. Riches and rank to me are no more than clouds floating by. Not only is Cao Ba ambitious, he is also disinterested in the best and the most positive way. He is uninterested with worldly success, or the words that are placed in his mouth here indicate that he cares nothing about power and prestige, just about being a great artist. And we imagine Du Fu can empathize with this feeling. Second stanza. Now, the second stanza will describe the glorious time that was evoked just a few lines before, the time when Cao Ba was court painter of Emperor Xuanzong, and especially his greatest achievement, a famed painting of, two achievements actually. His redecoration of an important pavilion in the imperial palace, and his painting of a very lifelike, marvelous painting of a horse. Often summoned to court during the Kaijuan period, you frequently ascended the dais to receive the emperor's praise. The Kaijuan period was the main reigning period of Emperor Xuanzong. In imperial China, emperors usually divided their reigns into periods. They created a slogan that would name a group of years, and it was supposed to represent those years and to be auspicious. Most emperors had different reign periods. One of Xuanzong's reign periods was the Kaijuan period, and it became later famed as a period just before the Anushan rebellion of unparalleled richness, prestige, splendor, artistic and military and political success. So in this olden time, not so olden, it must have been 10, 20 years back at the time of writing this poem, but already in this glorified period from the past, you went to the court, you got commissions, you were recognized. In the gallery of famous men, the noble faces were fading. Going to work with your brush, you made them bright again. One of the first commissions, or maybe one of the most important commissions that General Cao Ba received from the emperor, was the repainting of the gallery of famous men. Now, this was a pavilion in the imperial palace that had been constructed under the second Tang emperor, Taizong. And in it were painted the great generals who had helped Taizong and Taizong's father, Gaozong, establish the dynasty. So they were, you could say, the epic heroes of the dynasty, destined to be immortalized in their painted figures in this imperial pavilion. So General Cao Ba has to repaint them. I mean, years have passed, about a century or more since they were made. They have to be, updated, refreshed, the colors livened up a bit. And the work is done quite successfully. On the ministers' heads, you repainted their hats of office. At the waists of fierce generals, their great feathered arrows. So both the ministers, the civil officers, and the army officers are repainted with their elements, with their clothes, with their apparel. The Duke of Bao and Duke of A, so lifelike their hair bristles, stand grim, bold, and heroic, as if still drunk with battle. So two of the figures that are represented in the painting are detailed. I don't know who they are, but I imagine they were some of the important generals that helped Li Juan, the first emperor of the Tang, to defeat his enemies and win the civil wars. And they're painted in this couplet in an epic way, grim, bold, heroic, drunk with battle. The other commission is the painting of a horse of the current emperor. The late, Emperor Xuanzong, which at the time of writing this poem had retired and died. The late emperor's dappled horse, Jade Flower, was painted by artist after artist. None captured his likeness. So there are many artists serving the emperor. Painting was still improving, was an ongoing art form during the Tang, and many have successfully and unsuccessfully tried to paint the emperor's horse, but now General Cao Ba will do the master painting. One day, he was led into the courtyard below the red steps. Just standing, he brought with him the wind of the plains. So the horse, this jade flower, is brought into the courtyard close to the imperial throne. And, he seems to be bringing the speed, the wind, the air of the plains with him. At the emperor's command, you stretched white silk. Calling up all of your skill, you formed the image in your mind. So our painter is going to paint the horse. He concentrates, he forms a mental picture of the horse before putting it into action. And what happens? The painter paints, the miracle occurs. In a flash, from the ninefold heavens, the true dragon appeared. At one stroke, the horse paintings of ages were obliterated. So in a very epic couplet that finishes this stanza, the miracle occurs. Cao Ba is such a great painter that he literally makes the true dragon appear. The true dragons were sometimes used as metaphors for valuable, beautiful horses. So here, in a flash, as if in a miracle, as in a stately descent of a dragon from heaven, the true dragon appears. The horse is really represented successfully in the painting. And all the horse paintings of the past seem irrelevant when compared with this new masterpiece of quality, of beauty, and of mimesis, of realistic imitation of the horse. This idea of the relationship between art and reality, of the surpassing painter who can paint so realistically that his work is confounded with the real reality. This is a common obsession of art and also of the Western tradition, but we won't have time to talk about that today. Let's move on to the next stanza. The next stanza presents us with the consequences of this marvelous painting. All the court and the emperor are fascinated. A lot of the people in the court are a little envious. When the painting was taken up and hung behind the throne, the horse on the wall and that in the court stood facing each other. So here we have that emphasis on the mimesis. This beautiful horse that has been painted so realistically behind the throne looks at the real horse that inspired him at the foot of the steps in the courtyard. So two horses in a mirror-like image gaze at each other, the same horse, yet two. Smiling, the emperor urged his aide to bring a reward. Stable boys and grooms stood about, long-faced with envy. The emperor wants to reward this master painter. The stable boys are a bit envious, perhaps because they fear that the emperor will so much like the painted horse that he will start ignoring the real physical horses, including the one that inspired the painting. Your pupil, Han Gan, was shown all of your techniques. He too can paint horses in every stance imaginable. But Gan paints only the outer flesh, not the strong frame beneath. His brush would sap the spirit of legendary Hua Liu. So the stanza concludes with, okay, you're a great painter. Another person, Han Gan, has been taught your art, and yeah, he does it pretty well, pretty proficiently, but not as well as you. He isn't able to really capture the spirit, to really represent the underlying strength under the horse, and perhaps maybe from a more literal point of view, when we mentioned the strong frame beneath, perhaps the bones, the structure of the horse, behind or under, we should say, the flesh. So the artist is a genius. The artist is inimitable. The artists before him were not able to represent horses like this. His successors, even being taught the techniques, are not able to master, are not able to match the genius. So it's not just skill or learning that Cao Ba possesses. It's an inner genius, an inner flame that allows him to go beyond what any painter can go, and to master not only techniques, but the essential truth behind painting that cannot be taught, that cannot be transmitted, the genius of the artist. So Gan does well, but he saps the strength from the horses he paints. They don't look as powerful or strong as the real thing. Okay, next stanza. So the next stanza brings us back to the unhappy present. We had started with a little detour to Cao Ba's remote ancestor, the emperor, and the golden, at least for literature and for martial epics, the golden age his ancestor had lived through. We had been focusing on the Kaijuan era when Cao Ba was a court painter doing these marvelous works, but now we get back to the sordid present in which Cao Ba and Du Fu both languish, just as the empire is now languishing, half collapsed, half toppled, not having completely fallen after the Anlushan rebellion. The general is a superb painter because he captures the essence. In the past, you also made portraits, but only of exceptional men. Insight. Cao Ba is a person with insight. Not only can he paint beautifully and with ability, he captures the essence. He detects the essential truth behind horses or behind people, as he painted portraits in the past. And this is probably an ideal also for writers that Du Fu might think applies to himself. In the present troubled times, uprooted and homeless, you are reduced to painting portraits of humble passers-by. So desperate are your straits, you suffer dirty looks from vulgar eyes. Perhaps never in the world has a gentleman been poor as you. So that was in the past. Now in the present, your home has been destroyed by the barbarians. You are far from the capital, and you are reduced for earning a living to making paintings for passers-by, like the street painters that we find in our own cities. He is forced to almost beg for a living, and his paintings that entertained emperors now entertain pilgrims, passers-by, the common people who might be willing to give him a few coins in exchange for a beautiful image, for a beautiful painting. He is desperate. He suffers dirty looks from vulgar eyes. The people consider him just a beggar who paints for a living. They no longer are able to appreciate or see that he is a descendant of emperors and the courtly painter of the golden age so recently past. And the poem, this part of the couplet seems to conclude with a line saying, "Has this ever happened to anybody? Has a great gentleman fallen from so high to so low a position?" Of course, this is a rhetorical question. Du Fu knows his history, and he knows that this has happened a lot of times. He hasn't passed through a period of splendor or recognition in the previous period, but even he has fallen on worse straits than were the ones he enjoyed before. So, in a very moralistic, conclusive couplet that sums up this the sad fate and the sad predicament of the great, even of the great artists and the great creators. Life, is not ruled by morality. The good, the virtuous, the able, the creative, they also can suffer for the worse. But look at the lives of those in history rich in fame. Many among them also dealt with endless frustrations. You are not the first, definitely you will not be the last, to suffer the slings and arrows of inconstant fortune. This is the fate of mankind. And there is a bit of a consolation here, an attempt of consolation for Cao Ba and even for Du Fu himself. We may remember the golden times of the past. We may be happy, joyful in our artistic abilities. We should not lament living in dark times and coming upon economic and material difficulties. Such has always been the destiny of men, great and low, and such will continue to be. But our art will last. Today we read Du Fu's poems, and probably there are copies of Cao Ba's paintings that are still appreciated and gazed at in museums.